Bit of learning all the time. Right, we've got 7 responses from the Google form. Thank you, everyone. Now, I am going to, with some trepidation, I have to say, press the share screen button and see if this is going to work. And what you should see, please tell me it works again.
Yeah.
Oh, thank goodness. My new motherboard and processor has literally just arrived on the table a day early. So that's what I'll be doing tonight. Anyway, so welcome back to part 2 of the workshop. And these are the things that you talked about in your breakout rooms. And I'm just going to pick out some of the things from the summary here. So in terms of things that you like so far, well, we've got kind of peer issuing. We've got badges like constellations that you don't have to link it to your current accreditation if you don't want to. Lifelong learning, like a record for archiving, drilling down into specific skills, e-portfolios, an a la carte approach to learning, adding to formal education, include on your CV, engagement, cost-friendly, open, and you can have different skills than traditional qualifications, all that kind of stuff. That's all good. Make sure I've got the chat open in case anyone wants to comment on these as well. Right, then if we move on to the amber bits, this is the things that people had questions about. So let's see if I can answer any of these either just now quickly or in the bit that we do next. So how recognizable are they to employers? Well, I showed you the example of IBM. IBM are using those internally, but also other people are using the badges issued by IBM in other parts of the same sector. So I would say increasingly so, and I don't think it's unusual to see people with badges on their CV, especially in some sectors like tech, for example. How they work across disciplines, well, I guess that's up to you. How can a badge system be supported and structured within an HEI? Would badges need finer granularization, yada, yada, yada? Yes, that depends on what system you've got. One of the groups that I bobbed into was talking about, like, if you were trying to get sign off for a badge, it might take like 3 years. And in the meantime, someone else has come in, designed, issued the badge, and that person's gone through all of that and got a job at the end of it. And that is the competitive landscape that higher education is in at the moment, I would say. I'm going to talk about future learn and things like that in a moment. Questions about issuer standards. Yeah, there has been questions about the rigor of badges ever since the start. The rigor of a badge depends on the perception of the person who's viewing it, some of which you can control and some of which you can't. So for example, if you found out that Oxford University had been just issuing badges willy-nilly, not badges, issuing PhDs willy-nilly with no quality assurance, there'd be a scandal and the value of a Oxford University PhD would go through the floor. And that's because it takes a while to build up that level of trust and that kind of thing. So that's a long game, I would say. But you can kind of subvert that a little bit or bypass that by making sure that you have endorsement. So if you had like the National Council endorsing badges, or if you have, I don't know, some issuing authority putting their stamp on badges, that's quite good. City and Guilds did that in the UK. What can we do to support access, top-down or bottom approach? That depends on the organization quite a lot. It's usually both when you do change management. Issues, perspective, and design process, we'll go through that in a minute. Monitoring and managing long-term. How much work is involved after the initial creation? Well, it depends on how you're doing things. It depends on if you're going to version badges. It depends how many badges you're issuing, whether those badges ladder up into a bigger meta badge, all of those things. Where do you display the badge online? Yeah, so you can put them on LinkedIn. That's becoming easier over time. You can put them at the bottom of your email, but usually people have like a portfolio, and we'll go through badge issuing providers. Usually they have a place like a portfolio where you can show your badges, so you could link to them as well. Difference between digital badges and micro-credentials. This workshop is not long enough, and probably life isn't long enough to talk about the difference between digital badges and micro-credentials. I have written stuff about this in the past. We can talk about it in the Q&A if you really want to. Is every badge a credential? My first degree was in philosophy. Let's talk about that. And then red, what concerns, if any, does your group have? Cost, the best platforms. Will WIT be able to issue badges to outside the organization? Workload? How can badges from different providers stack up? Are there questions around competition? quality control, cultural shift, universal value of badges, how to align millions of badges, challenges in assessing it, academic integrity, challenges to current educational structures, digital access, skills provided, the amount of work, and over-formalization. So I'm delighted to be able to tell you that all of the concerns that you have in the red bit are concerns that people have had all the way through. It also delights me to tell you that these are all things that I can't really help you with, because they're all things to do with your organization and institutions. And apart from this one here, which would be like, what happens if there's millions of badges? Well, there already are millions of badges, and you don't have to deal with millions of badges at the time. You only have to deal with the badges in front of you as an employer or as the person who is issuing them. So I'm going to weave in some of the answers to these questions about issuing and about from a badge platform point of view in a moment. But that's really interesting. It looks like you had quite a rich discussion there. So thank you for whoever managed to write those down inside your group. Much appreciated. All right, well, let's continue. So we've had our break one to badge issuing platforms. We're looking to finish probably about 1:45. So in just over an hour's time, you'll have done your breakout rooms and stuff then, and we'll have some time for Q&A. I will need to leave bang on 1 o'clock. Usually I hang around until everyone leaves, but I need to leave bang on 1 o'clock because I'm running a workshop this afternoon as well on a completely different topic. So I need to have some lunch. Right, let's go on to badge issuing platforms then. Now, when you're thinking about a badge issuing platform, there are broadly 3 approaches that you can take. And in the early days of badges, then I would say a lot of people built their own platform. What they did was they looked at the standards, looked at all the things that you had to do technically to be able to build a badging system, and they built their own. And then we ended up with much more of a modular system because people thought, well, why are we doing bespoke development here when we could have a plugin for Moodle or for WordPress or whatever it is? So you ended up then, I would say, as badges progressed, with much more of a modular system. So that's why if you go and install Moodle right now, you will see that there are badges, you can issue badges through Moodle out of the box. That's just the way it works. There are plugins for WordPress, etc. You can use lots of different open source systems and you don't have to build your own bespoke system. But what I'm going to talk about today are off the peg ones. So this is like the software as a service platform. This is like when you sign up to a provider and you can become an issuer and you can issue badges via that platform. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to this. The advantage is that you can get started really easily. Those platforms often do a good job of user experience, what's known as UX. The downside is that you have to pay them a yearly fee. Sometimes you have to pay them based on the number of badges that you issue. You don't control all of the data. There's all of that as well. So what you decide to do is up to you, and you might have different badge systems for different departments. Because it's an open standard, and because you can move badges between systems, you can decide to change between them, and you can have badges issued by different platforms if you wanted to. That's the great thing about open standards. Just to go back, in case you weren't here in the first bit of the session, just to remind you, Mozilla, who make Firefox, who I used to work for, they created Open Badges standard. It's now looked after by an awarding body called IMS Global. And so they make sure that this standard is free and open, etc. A couple of years ago, I wrote a post because I realized that people weren't quite sure the different platforms out there. And I just chose 10 that I was quite familiar with. And so there's a blog post there in case it's useful. But as of right now, there are more than 25 certified systems for issuing digital badges, which are aligned with the Open Badges standard. So just a quick note on kind of terminology. When I was working at Mozilla, I did about 50 events in 52 weeks when I was kind of evangelizing Open Badges. And at one of those events, someone took me to one side. So this is an in-person event, if you remember those. Someone took me to one side and said, Doug, and this was serious face, like they were not joking. They said, Doug, you do realize that Open Badges will never take off unless you call them open medallions. Now, I did not know how to respond to that, but what I have learned in the 10 years since getting involved in open badges is that some people really do not like the concept of a badge. They think it's childish, whatever. So when I go into a room full of people with suits on, what I tend to do is talk about digital credentials aligned with the open badges standard, or whatever. Whatever you call them does not matter. If you want to call them digital sweeties, it doesn't matter as long as they're aligned with the open badges standard. The fact that they're aligned with that standard, with the metadata baked in, is what makes them valuable. What you want to call them is up to you. Who cares? As long as they're aligned with that standard. So those 25 plus certified systems, they're the ones that IMS Global Learning Consortium have certified as being compatible with the standard. They issue open badges. They can call them whatever they want, digital credentials, micro credentials, whatever, but they're aligned with the open badges standard. That's the important bit. Now then, the ones that I've used the most, and the ones that, I know the people who are behind these systems, I trust them, etc. I've dealt most with Badger, Moodle, who I used to work for, Open Badge Factory, openbadges.me, and Participate. Badger and Participate are headquartered in the US. Open Badge Factory is in Finland. Openbadges.me is in the UK. Moodle is based in Australia, although, as you know, it's open source, so you can install it yourself, kind of thing. So they're the ones that I've used the most. I'm not saying that they're the best. I'm just saying they're the ones I've used the most. Also, you should have a look at Badge Wiki. That's got a list of badge platforms. And also, if you want to see the ones that have been certificated by IMS in terms of technically, have a look at that link at the bottom as well. That list of 10 platforms for different things is there as well, in case you want it. But I'm going to talk about Badger today. I did think about kind of doing a comparison of all the different badging systems and the pros and the cons and this and that. But actually, I think that I just want to talk about Badger today. I highly recommend that you go and register on different platforms and play about and see what's going to be best for you. They've all got pros and cons. But the reason I'm focusing on Badger today is for three reasons. The first reason is that their user experience is particularly good, and they've really nailed that. The second reason, as you can see at the top right-hand corner of this particular slide, is that Badger is now built into Microsoft Teams. And I know a lot of people use that. So, you can use badges within Microsoft Teams if you've got that, and that's quite useful. Then the third thing is that I want to talk about badge pathways, because it's all very well talking about individual digital credentials, but actually the value of those things comes as part of a stackable pathway in context, thinking about how you can level up in terms of your skills. So with that in mind, you can find out more about this at badger.com. This is an example of the kind of badge that would be issued via Badger. Other platforms would be similar. So you can see the name of the badge, you can see the image, you can see what you have to do to get it, you can see who issued it, that they're verified, you can see the criteria for how to get that badge, and you can see that it's part of a pathway as well. If you're a developer, or if you're technically minded, you can see the JSON at the bottom. So that's kind of the code behind it to see all of the details of that particular badge. So this is what's known as the badge class. This is the badge which can be earned by lots of different people. So when, for example, Ken earns this badge, there is an instantiation of that badge which has been issued to one person, which is Ken, and that particular badge belongs to Ken. But this is the badge class. This is like showing all of the badges that can be earned by people who become master teachers at Georgia State. All right, let's just dive into badge pathways then. Badge pathways from Badger, they have created a new standard. It just hasn't been adopted by very many people yet. So badge pathways, anyone can align with this particular standard, this pathway standard. It just happens to be that Badger obviously has adopted the standards that they've created more readily than others. So the reason that pathways are particularly interesting is that you can build those stackable digital credentials and you can balance the rigorous outcomes that you want as an institution. You want to make sure that these people have done the things that you want from them, but also users can choose what they want to do. So like when I was at university, I could choose which philosophy module I wanted to do. I wanted to specialize in a particular area. but I could choose from this range and I can kind of work my way up like that. My son's doing his GCSE options today, actually, and he can choose from a range, but we know that he can choose within particular groups of subjects, that kind of thing. So it just gives you that kind of choice. So there's all these different pathway galleries you can go to. Here's a couple of examples. This is the Virtual Learning Academy. They've got a culinary arts pathway, and you can see here everyone starts with 1A. That's the building block. But you could then choose from these things here. You then have to do one from this group and one from that group. And these kind of stack up. And when you've finished all of that, you get this badge. And as I was saying in some of the breakout rooms, well, once you've earned this badge, you would never bother showing these badges anymore, because what's the point? Because this badge has all of the information to say that you've earned all of these badges as well. So it's kind of a meta level badge. And that, I think, answers some of the questions and some of the concerns that people have. They say, well, what happens when people have got 1,000 badges? Well, they're not going to show 1,000 badges. They're going to show all of the ones which are the biggest, chunkiest ones, which kind of stack up all the rest of them. Here's another one. This is pathways about empowering teaching excellence. So you can see here, again, everyone starts with the same badge. They get to do, sometimes it's one of these, sometimes you have to do 3 of them, whatever it is. And then you kind of move on like that. Some of you who are like me, who are gamers, this is a skill tree on games. Yeah. So if you're trying to level up as a wizard or as an elf or whatever it is, if you're playing Tomb Raider, if you're doing any games like this, if you're playing Age of Empires, if you're playing Civilization, this is a skill tree. And so what it does is it shows in a visual way the knowledge, skills, and understanding that people need to be able to get to a certain level. And I think that kind of gamification can be really, really useful, because it helps learners and earners understand where they are on a particular journey. It makes it much more visual, much more tangible. Mags has put digital brooches, cheaper than diamonds, get it up on Antiques Roadshow. One of the things I think is really interesting, just as a quick aside on that, actually, Mags, is that, earlier I was talking about IC certificates as being like tangible printed versions of badges. Well, I've seen some people 3D print badges. So just because you issue a digital badge doesn't mean that's the only thing you issue. You can issue a badge and a certificate and a little lapel thing if you want to. Whatever you want to do, it's useful. I'm a Creative Commons fellow. I was trying to get them to issue me a badge alongside my little kind of lapel pin that I got for being a Creative Commons fellow. Another question that came up in the breakout rooms was about frameworks and about having some kind of alignment of badges. Now, you can do whatever you want. You can decide that this badge just exists by itself and it's not aligned with anything. But I would recommend that you try and come up with some kind of standard. Now, FutureLearn, I know some people who work there, they've developed this thing here, this common micro-credential framework. And the reason they've done that is that they want to make sure that other MOOC providers, when they're developing similar courses, they're kind of worth the same. What they don't want is a race to the bottom where people are undercutting one another. So if you go to that particular link there, and maybe I'll just quickly put that into the chat so people can see. There we are. If you scroll down that particular page, what you'll see is a list of all of the things that you have to do to align with the common micro-credential framework. That's the most common one that I've seen in Europe at the moment. In America, as anyone who's got experience with US education will know, there are lots of these kinds of initiatives going on. So like Credential Engine are doing lots of work around this. The US Department of Education is doing stuff around this. Anything to do with standards. It can be really useful because people know what they can align to, but also it can be a bit of a straitjacket as well. So try and align with standards where you can, but if you can't, don't feel like you have to be hemmed into them as well. Create your own standards, that's okay as well. So have one for Irish higher education, have one for, I don't know, like computer science in Irish higher education, have one just for your organization. Maybe have a more lightweight framework for digital credentials than you have for degrees. Whatever's going to be useful to you. All right, so I'm going to pause there in case anyone's got any questions in the chat. Very long teacher pause. Okay, so on to the next bit then, designing your first badge. Now, I've done this lots of different ways before. I've got people to fill in like a business canvas, but for badges, and I'll show you one of those in a moment, and taken like a full day to develop some badges. I have got people to go into badge issuing platforms and design their badges in there. But all of those I've found have been suboptimal ways. And so Brian, who I have shown images from previously, Brian is a very talented fellow, and he has a background actually in computer science. And so he has this amazing website called the Remixer Machine. And the Remixer Machine has something called Badge Bloom. And it's just an interactive way of being able to fill in all the important information that you need if you were designing your first badge. So a really super simple way of doing it. So let me show you that. First of all, here is something that a company called Digital Me, who I did a lot of work with when I was at Mozilla. When I was consultant with City and Guilds, Digital Me was acquired by City and Guilds. And eventually, basically, what's happened is their particular platform, they've subsumed that under Credly. And Credly has been subsumed under Pearson Acclaim. So if that isn't confusing, I don't know what is. The upshot is that this particular badge canvas, which can be really useful if you use this in your institution, which is Creative Commons license, as you can see at the top there, this is quite complicated to fill in. It takes a while to do. It's really useful, but it takes a while to fill in. I'm happy to do this with you if you want to do this in a separate workshop, whatever. But there's a Google Drive link there to the PDF at the bottom if you want to use it yourself. If you've ever filled out a business canvas, it's a similar kind of thing. You're thinking about like the badge as a product, and you're thinking about your users, you're thinking about your channels where people find out about it, you're thinking about pathways and evidence and criteria and whatever. So that's a really good way of doing that. But for the purposes of the time that we've got here, I'm going to focus on this tool here that I've just mentioned called Badge Bloom. So the great thing about Badge Bloom is that you just fill in some boxes, and it's not going to create a real badge. What it's going to do is it's going to create like an image, which you can then use to start thinking about what your first badge would be. And this is what we're going to do now. We're going to go into breakout rooms in a minute. And I'm just going to demonstrate this for the benefit of those who might not have seen this kind of thing before. Thanks, Ken. So I'll go to the link first, and I'll come back to these slides. So this is Brian's website. This is Badge Bloom. And all you do is just you literally click on here and you start typing. So who issues? Ken McCarthy. Right, who's going to earn it? Mags. Yeah, or whatever. Why do they want it? How do you earn it? Like, what do you have to do? Who signs it off? What's next? You fill all that in. You press save and share. You just log in using your Google account or your Twitter account or whatever. And then you can put it on the gallery. You can see all the different badges that have been designed as well. So you can see here, the one I did yesterday, my badgety badge, and you probably see it better if I switch back to here. But my badgety badge is, who's going to issue it? Well, it's going to be the workshop leader. The earner is going to be the workshop participant. Why are they going to earn it? To prove that they actually attended rather than just taking the morning off. What do they have to do to earn the badge? Well, they have to be present at both sessions of the workshop and have to engage in activities. Who's going to assess it? Well, Ken, I guess, the workshop organizer, he's got the participant list. And what happens next as a result of the badge? What's the so what? Well, they can create their own badge and they issue it to someone else and kind of keep the chain going. Or they could invite me to run a workshop at their institution, or they could run a workshop themselves, or whatever it's going to be. So I'm going to remind you of this image here, which might be useful. These are the four kind of areas that we see a lot of badges being issued for. So belonging to a particular group or organization, like I'm on the subcommittee of whatever it is. Participation, getting involved in something. Reaching a particular standard. So I have reached, this standard along with all these other people, and I can now say that I am a certified whatever it is. And mastery as well. I have demonstrated excellence. I am the top I'm in the top 5% in this institution for whatever it is. I have earned this award for teaching excellence. So with that in mind, again, I just want to pause. I'm going to unshare my screen. What I'd like you to do is to go back into your breakout rooms in a moment. And when you go into your breakout rooms, you can spend the first bit, if you want, having a chat, then design your badge, and then do a bit of peer critique, like just help each other along, think about how you can make each other's badges better. For some of you, this won't be the first time you've designed a badge, but for some of you, it will be. And it's surprisingly difficult to think through some of these things when you're thinking about it from the earner's perspective. So we know why you would want to issue a badge, because you've thought of why someone should have it. But trying to think about why someone would want to receive it is a different matter altogether. So I've just done one here for workshop participants. You can do one for whatever you want. You could do one for membership, participation, mastery, or capability. You can do more than one. If you do more than one, it might be one that stacks upon it, whatever you want to do, really. But I'll go into the rooms that I haven't so far, and I'm going to unshare my screen. And if you would like to put anything in the chat as a question, or if you'd like to unmute and ask a question, that's fine. And then we'll get everyone in there.